Welcome to the Old Mac Gang podcast, or vodcast if you want to call it that, or just simply call it OMG, with a panel of longtime Mac Apple users who want to discuss the most relevant apps and services to age-seasoned users. I'm Marty Gensius, an Apple enthusiast and podcaster. I'm a 67-year-old age-seasoned user who's collected a smaller group of friends this week. We'll talk about that in a minute. To talk about Apple and talk about what seasoned citizens use Apple for. Today's topic, we're going to talk a little bit about Macstock because Gary and I came back from Macstock, and bear with us. You know, it's like going to your friend's house and they show you pictures of their vacation. You got to sit through it. We'll share our insights in that. And then we're going to talk about the activity monitor in Mac OS, and Chris is going to take the lead on this because he's had the energy to be able to get into this. And I think we're going to start doing this with apps that everybody has, meaning the kind of apps that are already produced and are part of your Mac OS or your iOS. That we're going to spend our shows talking a little bit about those kind of apps, because why talk about a $350 app that you have to purchase that when there's so much on the Apple platform that you can use. So let's see who's with us today. It's going to be a short list.
Hey, good evening. I'm Chris. I'm a 78-year-old retiree here in Tucson, Arizona. I've been around the Mac since 1984 and spent a lot of time with the Apple user groups, and then went on to work at Apple. And after that, worked in university IT, and now I'm retired here in Tucson. I use an M1 Mac Mini, iPhone 16 Pro Max, Watch Series 6, 9th generation iPad, and happy seasoned user. Gary?
I'm a seasoned user too. Yesterday was my birthday. I was 88 years old. I live in Northeast Ohio along with Marty and Peter. My primary Apple product is a Mac is a M4 Mini along with a couple of screens. So that's my most comfortable working computer. I too have a watch, iPad, and I took to Macstock um, an Air that I use. Uh, uh, Marty?
So Gary, if you can or are willing, did you do anything special for your birthday?
Well, did you really want? Well, I did. I went to church. I've got
Okay.
a new friend, so it was a surprise. I didn't really. My son's been visiting me, been working around the house, and we thought about going. We still are. There's a F1 F1 Brad Pitt movie playing, but
Yeah.
I it's the weather's been beautiful in Ohio, and I'm just hanging out around the house and with my friends.
Good. Good.
Thanks.
So so let's talk about Macstock. You and I got into a car at 7 o'clock in the morning. I think I begged an extra hour of sleep off you, and your son Jack drove you down so we could meet closer to my house, and then we took off and really kicked time. I mean, we really did well with time getting there from Ohio, and got into Chicago. Spent some time in Chicago with my sister and brother-in-law. Had a meal because we were picking up Will, my son, who was going out to Macstock with us, and we picked him up at O'Hare, which was nuts. Picking up people at O'Hare with the construction and with fencing and all sorts of things. It was nuts. And then we headed out to Macstock. And I maybe we'll start with when we checked in, because when we checked in, you were already connecting with people. Bob was there. You know, he was tracking us all the way over to Illinois, and I think he really wanted to be there when we showed up because he kept asking me through text
Oh,
messages, where are you? You know.
oh,
So what
well,
was your start with your greeting and your
I,
experience.
well, I think primarily though, because of Marty, and then of course it was wonderful to meet Will. But that was what got me to Macstock. I knew what the, or I looked at the program, but it was an opportunity to go spend some time with Marty, and then when I got there, I had watched some of Chuck Joyner's Road to Macstock interviews, and then Peter and I did a virtual pass 2 years ago when we first, at least when I first found out about Macstock. So I, it was really a small extended family group of people with an easy opportunity. Everything was at the Holiday Inn in Crystal Lake. So it was made for a gathering, and it was also the ninth Macstock. So a lot of people are returnees because it's more of it's a gathering. And then I introduced myself to a few people that I knew their name and felt very welcoming.
Yeah,
So
and I was concerned because occasionally I'd look around because I like to also be a good host when I'm taking people into new places, and it's like, I want where's Gary? And then I'd look around and I'd see you'd be over somewhere in the other part of the room talking to somebody or having lunch at another table, and you were taking. I mean, you're old enough to do this, but it's just my kind of caretaker piece. You were taking care of yourself pretty well
well,
through the weekend in terms of sitting down with people and I think feeling comfortable.
and Chris, Roger came with Bob, so I've only seen really Roger on the Tucson Mug Group, and then Roger uh, ran the whole technical. I guess you'd call it a soundboard if we were at a concert, but and he explained everything to me, and then the other, whether we're getting a benefit, was I was really anticipating the ECAM because Marty's really the leading edge of using ECAM, which so I was anxious to kind of see what they had to say about it. They did one of the presentations.
Yeah, their presentation was interesting because I think Mike was really we're all really happy to have them as a sponsor um, for the event, one of the sponsors for the event. But they showed up in full force with Katie Fox and Doc Rock, who was kind of the face. They're both the face of Ecamm. And I saw you one time at a lunch table sitting there next to Katie, and you were bending her ear, and their presentation was about the taking the leap to doing something like this, like what we're doing right now, making the leap to put yourself on camera to do a show about something that you enjoy. Start it. You got to start it, and you got to be as consistent as you can. And we've been consistent with 35 episodes now, which has been great. On a weekly basis, I think we haven't missed a week. Maybe we did one week. I can't remember, but we've been consistent. And then they were very kind about saying, things will get better the more you do it, and all
Mm.
of your fears will kind of dissipate in it. They weren't there to give us a technical rundown on how to use Ecamm. They were really there to say, this is how you do media, and this is how Ecamm can help you with the media, but this is how you have to get your head in the space to do it. So that was appreciated. There were a lot of presentations that went so deep into certain areas. It's like, okay, I'll catch this on the video later. Because I couldn't possibly keep up with everything that they were putting up there. So the advantage of that is if you went there, you get the live stream as part of the package, when the live, or I should say the recorded stream, when the recorded stream is produced and put together. And as Mike described it, it's going to be the Roger cut, basically, because Roger did all the camera work with that as part of the the setup and the run with it. So it was, there were parts that were tough, and there were parts that were just a lot of fun to do, and a fun to be at. Is there anything in particular you enjoyed, Gary?
Well, I'm such a big fan of you and Will. Uh, the first one was Marty did talked about. I marked them down. There were 15 different programs. It was an intense, long. It went to almost the end of Sunday and Friday, I think. Anyway, there are 15 programs. I did, and Marty began the beginning with Apple Intelligence, and he and Will finished it off, which I thought was kind of clever of knowing the Gear Up and Go, that they may have been talking, and they did a little bit because, Will has spent time in Vegas, but he had a different twist of having, I don't know, 9 or 10 or 11 different prize bags on the stage. And instead of telling people about all this Gear Up and Go that you should take, he had people in the audience who volunteered, who went and for a couple of minutes only spoke about their gear, and then then they received the prize. So it was a twist on what you would normally expect, I think, at more, say, a technical conference. And then there was a lady there who I made a note, and maybe in the show notes, though, will be the website again to go there so you can find out all the speakers. But a couple caught my eyes, at least in passing, to know that it's there, and I made a note of it, that about the blind and low vision Mac users with inclusive tools. And she mentioned two solutions by this Pneumatic Solutions, a remote incident manager, RIM, and a scribe for meetings, which makes me think if you ever come across somebody who may be interested or could use that, you could pass that on. And then there was a discussion about passkeys that I like. Things that apply to me that I'm using. Otherwise, it's more of a. For example, there was one, and not against anything. One of them was on. Oh, that on just demystifying Mastodon. So I don't use it. So I kind of
Mm-hmm.
listened, but it was okay.
Yeah. We also had Mac Voices Live did a panel. We did a panel at the end of the day, which was kind of fun. And so we were all appearing together on stage at the same time. And it was fun with the kind of questions that Chuck was asking us live and on stage. Then we did a Vision Pro meetup later in the evening on Saturday, where we had people come in and try the Vision Pro headsets on. And it was surprising to me because many of them said, yeah, I went to the store and saw the demo, but I wanted to come down here and not have to be demoed, basically to try it on and play. And you show me what you like and let me experience that. So it was a full weekend. And again, like watching somebody's vacation pictures, you don't want to go on too long. So I'm just going to say it was enjoyable. I had a great time. I have my connection and my understanding, and I mentioned this on Chuck's show last night. There was this moment of clarity for me, which is a term that we use in mental health and particularly in addictions, where you have this understanding of what the connection is that you have with your God, with your world, with the people around you, whatever it is. And I had one of those moments of clarity with the people that I've been doing podcasts with now over the year, and podcasts that I've been on, like this group, how they have become really very much my friends and my support, and the fact that we're doing these experiences together and it's all a part of our lives in some way that was what clicked in me. It wasn't necessarily the latest technology or anything like that, but I had that experience there, and so I walk into doing these now with a different frame of reference. So that was my best take home. And so yeah, I that was Macstock. You can find out about it at macstockconferenceandexpo.com. You can see, as Gary mentioned, you can see the schedule, you can see the presenters and find out about them. And you can look for a virtual pass or a digital pass coming up where those videos will be ready probably in about a month, and you can watch whatever one you want, and you can watch it as many times as you want, and learn some really cool stuff through the experience. It's well worth the cost of the digital pass that Mike is selling. So again, MacstockConferenceandExpo.com. We'll have that link in the show notes. So, activity monitor. And activity monitor, Chris sent along a set of ideas, and I tried to pick the one that was kind of had the smallest window, because some of the ideas like notes would be and will be a whole show sometime. But I wanted to get something that the two or three of us could just clip out of the way but still be important. So, Chris, simply, what is Activity Monitor?
Well, Activity Monitor is a little bit like the Task Manager in Windows. It's a way to see what your computer is doing, whether it's memory, energy, disk usage, network, etc., to monitor this activity, particularly for a troubleshooting aspect. And Marty, you thankfully put together some really good links here that we'll have in the show notes, where people can go and read about this exactly, what it does and sort of why. And for sort of a background on why somebody would want to use this, for average users who are doing email and web and stuff, this may rarely be a problem. But for those of us who are sort of performance driven and are, I'm a photographer, so I run a ton of photo apps, and who are always kind of pushing the machine. In my case, my M1 Mac Mini maxed out at 16 gigs of RAM. That's all I could get back with the M1. And I'm sort of scraping by because I use an iPad to do mail and notes and stuff, and, take, the small stuff away. So if I'm really running too many photo apps and running out of RAM, I can do that. But it can be very handy, and trying to think for this first question. Well, it has tabs across the top for CPU, memory, energy, disk, network, and apparently this is a cache tab. I haven't seen that before, but if you're caching with a lot of cache files on, like iCloud, I guess, that could come into play. But in a way, it's lots more info than most of us are going to need unless we're developers. However, as end users, it's there, and I tend to run it all the time. I load it at startup. It's always running and in the background. So if my machine is running slow, that's the first place I look. However, I should interrupt and say the most important thing on a Mac, if your machine is running slow, is look at your system drive, your startup drive, your Macintosh HD or whatever you call it. Make sure you've got 10% free. When I was doing university IT computer support, I would see that, maybe more than once a day. Somebody would come in, gee, my Mac is running really slow. Well, yeah, it's got, megabytes of room left. It's got 500 megs of room, and, it's a terabyte drive. You need 100 gigs free. And so, I mean, 10% is the guideline we usually used. If you use high performance software like CAD/CAM or photography software, a lot of Adobe software and stuff, if you're using apps simultaneously, you may want to have it more like 15% to 20% free. But otherwise, that's sort of a quick overview. Does that make sense, Marty?
There are apps that you can use outside of Activity Monitor. I mean, people have capitalized on making an app for this too. So there are a variety of apps. iStat Menu is probably one that is the most familiar, that kind of sits up in your menu and will give you your activity and the levels of your GPU and CPU and how much memory is left and how much virtual memory versus real memory is left and how much of your RAM you're using at the time. So people have capitalized this, but it's already there on your Mac. If you want to go in and see it, you can use Activity Monitor to do it. And being the kind of app freak that I am, I do buy some of those supplemental apps. And we've talked about Clean My Mac before on here. And for some of those problems that you identify with Activity Monitor, there are apps that will help you streamline and clean some of the large caches that you're holding that you don't need anymore, things that you can eliminate that will not change it will not reduce the operation of your Mac. It will just make it run more efficiently by getting all this stuff that you're holding on to. I've got a closet that is full of things here, empty boxes and stuff that I will never use again. That someday I'm going to have to open that closet up and say, yeah, it's time to get rid of this. It's time to get rid of that. And that's what apps like Clean My Mac does. And that's what apps like Activity Monitor will allow you to do. Now, is this under utilities or do you know if it stands
It is.
alone on so people would
It
find it under,
actually is in yeah,
yeah,
it's in the utilities folder, which is in the application folder.
yeah.
And a lot of people don't use this or know about it, but it could live in either folder really, as well as if you have other utilities in the application folder that you can move them into the utility folder. Now, why would you want to do that? Just real quick, because if you have your applications folder in the dock and you click on it, you get a list. But your list may be really long, like mine is, and you want to pull some of those things and make a shorter activity list. Or you can do it with aliases. I do this with my photo software. I have different aliases in a folder which is in the dock, but every time an app changes, then I have to put a new alias in. So it is sort of convenient, but it requires a little bit more maintenance. But yeah, it is in the utilities folder. And there's another app, and gosh, I wish I had this at my fingertips, but it allows you, it's like the tree software that you sometimes see in Windows. It shows you what's taking the most amount of space on your hard drive. And that
Yeah,
can be really handy.
that is Daisy Disk is the app
That would
that'll
be
do
one.
that.
And it can
That'll
be really helpful because, you may have saved, like, I don't know, somebody, for some reason, you have a bunch of movies, say, that are on your system disk. Well, most people would put movies on an external disk only because they take up so much room, you know?
Mhm.
And so you may be able to real quickly free up some space on your Mac. I mean, I hear about people that are deleting emails to save space on their hard drive. It's like, oh my God, you're going to be here all day and it's not going to help
Yeah,
that much, You have to go after the big fish, You want
yeah.
the really big ones. Or if you don't have something like that in the Finder, you just set it up. So find me every file that's bigger than 5 gigabytes. That
Mhm.
may be it right there. Suddenly you've got like a 30 gigabyte file you forgot about, and that can
Yeah.
help, that
Gary,
sort of
you were
thing.
gonna
So that's pretty easy to do too.
yeah, Gary, you were gonna say something. I think you were gonna ask Chris something.
Oh, no, well, I was, but Chris, I don't use it. I put the activity monitor in my dock so I can get to it. Uh, but I thought what
Sure.
you said was important that people who can't get enough RAM and don't have it, having the activity monitor is almost like a scorecard then, knowing, and then as you said, to have 10% free to be running at the most maximum you can all the time. So it's kind of letting you know what's eating up the memory.
Which this is a little bit of background too. The reason we get into this nowadays is two things. When Apple originally went with the Unix kernel, basically for Mac OS 10, I'll just leave it at that without any more detail, but it was much better at memory management. And over the years, Steve really put the hammer down on terms of, you know, developers just had to manage their memory better, as Apple did too, so that now you have a situation where when you quit an app or if an app is on idle, it gives back a lot of that RAM that it's using, right? Didn't used to do that. So if
Mm.
you had Quark Express and PageMaker running on Mac OS 8, you better have a lot of RAM because they were just going to eat it all. And, nowadays you don't really have that. It's pretty rare. I've actually got a situation right now. I won't mention the developer. It's one of the big ones, but they have what I would call a memory leak where it just uses more and more RAM, and sooner or later I have to quit. But hopefully that's a short-term thing, and that'll be fixed. But so what's happened with this better memory managed world that we live in on the Mac is people run more stuff, right? It's like the old expression: if you put shelves in your garage, they'll fill up with junk. It's the same idea, right? And so I mean, this happens, and so we do stuff like, for instance, Marty, when you're compiling and getting the these podcasts ready to put up on YouTube or the recordings and so on, that's a lot. That's pretty RAM intensive, right? And
Yeah,
so
it's
you've got
it's
a
RAM
lot of
intensive.
apps running.
Yeah, it's RAM intensive. It also the storage fills up pretty quickly, and I was ignoring that for a long period of time, and I would just put it in a done file. Like, so each one of the shows that I do has a folder, and in the folder has
Yeah.
all the video, all the audio, all the uncompressed video, all the uncompressed audio. It has every file and every step that I take along the way. Well, I had a folder for each one of those shows, and would to clear them off my desk space, I would go ahead and throw them into a folder I called Done. That was a subfolder of the folder with all the podcasts in it. Well, that filled up and filled up and filled up. And at the same time, if you're using Ecamm, it's creating a copy of it in the documents file on, like Zoom does, in the documents file on your drive. So I'm working with these and I think I have control of it, but secretly over in my documents file, I'm getting these copies of all the live stuff that we've done, storing up in documents. And finally, I was getting this, your disk is about full. And I'm like, huh? And I did
Mm.
just what you said, Chris. I kind of located and figured, oh man, yeah, all of this stuff that's being stored in documents that I'm never seeing, of all the video and all the Zoom meetings I've ever done that we've recorded, I wound up taking all of that and physically moving it off onto an external hard drive. Um,
How
and
much was
so,
it? Do you remember how big it was?
it was probably half a terabyte at least, because
Ah,
I bought a 2 terabyte
yeah.
external drive to throw the stuff on. And so now periodically I do that. I go and I check the done folder, and it's sort of like, okay, it's time for me to move these folders onto an external spot, and also to go and check the documents folder that I have, where all of the original copies are being made while I'm doing them that I forget about. So yeah, and again, there are apps that will help identify those kinds of files, and some of them have been like, I put together a huge video for my brother's funeral, which included lots of photographs and things like that. And when I ask to look for large files, that's one that always comes up. but I don't want to take it off the hard drive. I want to make sure it's there. So I have to make some decisions about which ones I want to get rid of, because that's an extra copy of that video, which I also have stored somewhere in the cloud, and I also have stored on an offsite hard drive. So there are certain things I won't delete because I want to have redundancy with it. But the podcasts are out there already. The vodcasts are there. So if I ever lose them, I know I can go to YouTube or go to Spotify and get them. But yeah, you would be surprised how that builds up, and you don't think it's going to build up. And those types of services and Activity Monitor will tell you, some of that information in terms of why your machine is slowing down and how much is being used of the RAM that you have is being used to deal with currently running programs, which is important.
Yeah.
Well, for some of the ongoing processes that you do every week, sometimes you can just reroute where those files get saved onto an external drive automatically. Like one of the first things I do is I move my Apple photo library, which has got about 100,000 images in it now, and it's just, it lives on an external drive. It happens to be an SSD that's in the dock for my M1 Mac Mini, so it runs really fast, but it doesn't even have to be on the system hard drive, right? So that can save a lot of room, because I think that's 97 gigs. And 2 years ago, when I updated to the new beta of probably iOS 17, I made an archive copy on my Mac. Well, later I ran into the same problem, and I thought, what's going on? And then I figured out I had this file that was like 110 gigabytes. And I thought, or was it, it was, yes, gigabytes. And I thought, what the heck is that? What was my archive? And, because it was a 128 gig, iPhone. And when I archived it, it made 110 gigabytes out of it. And there they were sitting on the system drive. So, at that point I could get rid of that. So that wasn't a problem. So things will come up with hard drive space, which is almost a separate issue, I think. Yeah. Gary, did you have a question?
Yeah, this is almost somewhat related, but I'm thinking about Ask Me Anything at T-Mug as you're sharing this. But Zoom is available for free at the small level for everybody. And the whole Ask Me Anything, which the few that we've been on, Marty speak a few other clubs, but Cleveland is hurting for people. But in the Tucson area, where you're talking about stuff you're doing, Chris, where our listeners and viewers, it may interest them, but it's like, how do I implement and learn that? That this is almost maybe a little plug, or not so much a plug, but Marty, I don't know how to pivot that we're sharing information, but then for the listener or viewer to kind of take it to the next level and start using it. I don't quite know, but that thought of me of learning from other people has to be working for a lot of people in this age season group that I believe we're in.
Yeah, to answer your question, Gary, I think first take a look at the links that we supply on the topic.
Yeah.
Because that will explain, if anything, what it does. And our second question is how you might use it. And the links associated with that are more focused on use scenarios for it. And then I'd say YouTube. And you know this, Gary. You can look up almost anything on YouTube.
And then ask, write to us. So if we're, that how it's, how it's working for you, and are you using it? Okay.
Yeah. So, Chris, anything you want to add to question number 2 with how do you use it? How might it be helpful?
we've covered a lot of this. I use the example of the photography apps, and I might have several going at the same time. Apple's, Adobe's, Photolab from DxO. I might have all of these running, and then, okay, maybe I quit one or something. But there there are instances where an application can sort of go rogue, right, where it's taking more RAM. And in the old days, the first thing that would happen is the application would lock up, so you couldn't quit it. And then Apple came out with Force Quit, which worked pretty well, but you almost had to restart. And nowadays, thank goodness, we're past that. And I had a situation like this, oh gosh, about 3 or 4 months ago. And, so I couldn't really, almost always I can force quit the app or just quit the app if and have it save stuff and so on. But it didn't. And then lo and behold, all of a sudden my machine restarts on its own. It comes back up and everything's fine again and nothing's gone. So in other words, it even went as far as to restart my machine because it knew it needed a restart. And I thought, wow, that is really slick. Because in the old days, particularly on those slower machines back in the Mac OS 8 days, it would take 5 minutes for the machine to restart and for everything to get settled.
Yeah.
And it's a funny anecdote, but Steve wanted all the apps to like instantly be ready, like click on it and boom, it's there. And at the time, we all thought, boy, I don't know what he's smoking, but now we have it. I mean, apps just start up in an amazingly short amount of time. And so, a lot of this is sort of historical, but it's good for people to know, particularly folks who overdrive their machines. And, it's just good to know that things out there that you can do, or, you might be an unsuspecting end user where for some reason you've got to run 3 or 4 apps or something, and they're really big apps. And this kind of thing may be helpful in terms of just monitoring or knowing, okay, there's a huge app. I have an indexer for Apple Mail that I run. Well, that does tend to take up a lot of RAM. So when I need to, I quit it, and that'll free up that amount of memory. Or, Apple Mail itself takes up a lot of memory. So, I can quit that to save the RAM and then load it on my iPad in universal control so that it uses the same keyboard and mouse and stuff. So there are solutions out there to work on machines where you really wish you had more RAM.
Yeah, I use Activity Monitor, and we'll open it up when I suspect something's going on with my machine because it's been acting wonky, and it doesn't do it as much as it used to. Only because I've got I think a more powerful processor and a lot of RAM, so it can stumble around, and I've got enough RAM where multiple things can be running at the same time and it doesn't create problems. But sometimes when that does, I'll open up Activity Monitor just to see where the memory hog is going on. Why is this using this? And surprisingly, we have a lot of programs that have that run in the background that we use for startup, and they run in the background, and we might not even use them the whole time we're on our computer for that day, and they're back there taking memory and holding on to memory as part of the startup procedures. So it will identify things that I didn't know were running in the background and remind me, oh yeah, I got that going because I've got Adobe running, and Adobe has Adobe Companion, and that's going to run in the background for me, and that's going to take some of it. And then I've got this, and then and I'm not using that at all, but it always turns on because it's part of my startup process. Maybe I should consider whether or not I need to have that as part of the startup process. So it's more kind of an informative. And then, but the functionality of it depends on me to do something about it. It's not set up for it to do things for me. Yeah.
Well,
nowadays too, with these M chips that the M1, 2, 3, 4, that with the unified memory, on the chip, where it's system on a chip, and the thing is only about that big, right? And
Yeah.
it the data paths are infinitely shorter to get to RAM and stuff. There's no bus anymore. There's no
Right.
motherboard per se. It's a chip. And so things are dramatically faster, and there's no penalty for running a laptop, because you can fit that same SoC, or system on a chip, into a laptop as you have in a desktop. Although you may have more stuff, obviously, in a big Power Mac or something of it. But so it makes all of this just exponentially easier, which of course is the beauty of Apple Silicon.
Gary,
But
final thoughts or things that you
No.
want to add in?
Well, I was just going to say, it says it's running in the background makes you think that it's not taking up anything, but you brought that up, but it is. It's really running in the background, so it's using memory. And you may not need that particular program running in the background.
Yeah. Yeah. So just a couple more pages that we'll have up here. This is from Intego, and it's a Mac security blog that they have. But the article, which came out in 2024, just end of 2024 last year, how to use Activity Monitor to troubleshoot Mac problems. So it's a nice little article in there. It talks about the CPU tab, the memory tab. It'll be educative, and it will also give you some ideas on how to solve problems if there are problems associated. And then this one comes from Mac Rumors. It's a few years old, but it is a good kind of sourced article to talk about different things that you can do in terms of quitting apps in the activity monitor, and the CPU tab, the memory tab, the energy tab. All of these are part of the disk tab. All of this is part of what you can find in Activity Monitor. So take a look at those articles, and I'll put in links for some of the apps that we talked about, or that I talked about tonight outside of Activity Monitor. So you'll find those in the show notes. It's been an exhausting week for me, but it's always great to get together. Peter is at some conference in Indiana, I think, and Bob is still, he
Traveling.
drove. He's still traveling, and I guess Roger's with him. So they're, two wild and crazy guys slowly working their way back to Arizona.
Yeah.
And he'll have. Bob told me he picked some stuff up for you from the podcast, the podtalk.net swag that we gave away. So you make sure you get some of that and stickers. He was only going to pick up the Old Mac Gang sticker, and I said, Bob, pick up the rest of the podcasts that I do and bring them back for Chris. So, anyways, it's, as I said, it's been an exhausting week, and we're just sort of in recovery. I'm trying to get back into the swing of work. But you can email us at thepodtalknetwork@gmail.com. That's thepodtalknetwork@gmail.com. We appreciate feedback from our viewers and listeners. Your feedback helps us tailor programs for you, age-seasoned users like us, and we want to continue to use our Macs to make our lives more enjoyable. You can find out about the other shows and this show at thepodtalk.net. We mentioned Macstock, MacstockConferenceandExpo.com. Take a look at that site. But we'll wrap it up, and our next episode will be Wednesday, July 23rd at 9 p.m. through YouTube. You can always watch us live at youtube.com/@oldmacgang. And you can always pick up the podcast or video later if you don't catch us live. We have 3 watching now, which is kind of fun. We've got some folks in the chat room. And feel free to join us on the live show, ask questions, contribute, make comments. Nice ones are fine, rude ones are accepted too. But please share the show with your friends and Mac user groups. Our music bed is by Philip Gross, Marrakesh, courtesy of the Free Music Archive, part of the Creative Commons. More information about this podcast and others can be found at thepodtalk.net. Thanks to the group tonight. We've got Chris and Gary with Bob and Peter in absentia. And thanks for being part of the Old Mac Gang. See you next time.